Okay, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So welcome to our webinar on reducing contact center costs and enhancing the customer service journey with AI. Thank you so much for joining us. We're very excited to discuss this topic. My name is James Westbrook, and I am the Solution Marketing Lead at 1904 Labs. Just going to go over a bit of housekeeping first. So this session will be recorded, and we will be sending out the full recording to everyone who registered following the session. You're all automatically muted, but we do have the chat open, so you can ask questions in there or comment at any time. And we will have time dedicated at the end to go through a Q&A session where you'll be able to ask more questions then, or we'll address what you have asked throughout the webinar. So first, a bit about 1904 Labs, where we all are from. It is an IT consulting company helping enterprises build human-focused modern software and data solutions. Specifically in our AI-enabled customer service practice, we're focused on solving human challenges in the current contact center journey with AI. From 1904 Labs today, we have our two speakers. So Tom Thielen is the Director of AI-enabled customer service solutions. Before joining us, Tom spent 7 years managing technology product and operations teams at Centene, including its customer service product strategy. Lisa Bruce is a user experience designer and researcher. She is our resident expert at facilitating UX research and has spent time doing so at Wells Fargo and Mercy before joining 1904 Labs here in St. Louis. I'm now going to hand it off to Tom Thielen to talk through the agenda, and we will be away from there.
Thank you, James, and welcome to everyone to the second in our series of webinars on how innovative AI tools can improve customer service and operational efficiency in your organizations. Today, Lisa and I will discuss with you the biggest friction points your customers experience when making a voice call for service, and then how AI-powered intelligent virtual agents can reduce friction, improve experience, and reduce operational costs for customer contact centers. We're going to use a tool known as a journey map to explore the typical experience your customers encounter today when making a voice call for service. A journey map is generally depicts the key steps in an interaction from the user's perspective. So in this case, the caller, your customer, based on and where they experience, what the experience looks like today, and what we aspire to in the future. As you can see in this chart, there are many points of high friction encountered by your customers when they place a call for service today. We'll go ahead and jump right in with the first step in this type of interaction. Something has prompted a customer of yours to call. It could be a question, an issue, or a request, and they may have already attempted to accomplish what they need to get done via another channel, such as a mobile app or the web. Or it could be their first interaction with your organization regarding their request. Either way, the first thing they usually hear is a recorded message, often indicating there's a menu that they should listen to that has recently changed, so they must listen to all the options. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa now, and this is her area of expertise, and talk about what that experience feels like for a caller, your customer.
Well, I think ultimately what happens here is that the caller disengages, right? So if you look at our scale, it goes from red, which is like the worst, to green, which is the best. We're kind of into the orange zone. So it's not the worst, but it's pretty bad. So the caller disengages. What happens here? Typically what happens is that the caller will either not hear an option that fits them, or they just want to talk to a real person. And I'm curious, how many of you, drop this in the chat, the minute you hear that voice, do you start hitting 0 or saying representative, representative, operator, operator? Because that's what a lot of people do. They immediately try to cut to the chase. One of the other things that can happen, I see it. Yeah, see, I'm seeing several people pop up saying they do that exact thing. You're very much not in the minority. A lot of people do this. And so essentially the system doesn't allow the caller to easily tell them what they want. That's really what's going on here. Now, when a caller disengages, Tom, there's also stuff that happens right on the business side. Like, what impact does it make when a caller disengages?
So when a caller disengages at this point, at the beginning of a call, and just doesn't choose to interact in any way with the automated system, it's going to require your agents to spend more time on the phone, which drives up costs. The primary measure for this is called containment rate. And it's a measure of the proportion of your calls that come into your contact center that are completed via the automated IVR system without needing a live agent to intervene. So we're going to spend a little bit of time and talk about how an intelligent virtual agent that is conversational can improve this experience. But before we do that, we are going to take a look at a short video that illustrates what's possible at this step in the caller's journey.
How are you starting the dialogue with your customers when they call? We've all had the terrible customer service experience calling an IVR. Thank you for calling. Please listen to the complete list of options because our menu has changed. Press 1 for billing. Press 2 for claims. This type of experience frustrates callers and leaves them frantically hitting 0. Instead, intelligent virtual agents could be making the first impression with your customers warm and humanized. Meet Wally, our intelligent virtual agent for 1904 Labs.
Hi, thanks for calling 1904 Labs. I'm Wally. I can help you with questions about things like location, hours, parking, building access.
A warm first impression is just one way you can provide more humanized customer service. But intelligent virtual agents can do so much more to improve the customer experience while reducing call volume for customer service representatives and lowering contact center costs.
So Wally is really part of how we imagine this experience could get better. And I want to point out the key thing that happened there. The key.
How are you starting the?
Here we go. Let's hop to the next slide. So the key difference is a more natural conversation. So we heard at the beginning, press 1, press 2. That's not how people talk. Then we heard Wally say, you can ask questions about location, hours, and you get to tell Wally in your own words. It's really that simple. A more natural conversation. It keeps the attention of the caller. And now, we know it's a better user experience, but there's also some benefits that start happening for business when we manage to keep folks close here. Tom, what happens on the business side when we're talking about this step?
Lisa, this is a key potential opportunity for deploying intelligent virtual agents that are conversational, and the natural kind of human conversation ability working to keep a caller engaged avoids that immediate transfer to a live agent, which raises the likelihood the call can be completed without the assistance from a human agent. Also, the improved experience at this point can contribute to overall satisfaction level of your customers and at some level their view of your brand. Now that we've talked about potential improvement in this first step of the journey, let's take a look at the next step, which very often entails a caller responding to a menu of options. Lisa, what can you tell us about the caller experience when they have to when they've chosen to actually listen to this menu to try and communicate what they're after?
Well, we chose the exceedingly grumpy face here that says caller needs unmet. And that's really what's happening, right? So the system is trying to figure out what does the caller need, and the caller's trying to figure out how do I get the system to meet my needs. I want to ask a quick question though, James. How many times have you had experiences like this? I know that you have a little bit more of an accent. Like, have you had experiences with this kind of where you can't get your needs met?
Yes. So if you heard me speak at the start, you can tell I'm probably not from the St. Louis region where I currently live. I'm originally from Australia. And I moved across the US about 5 years ago now. And even calling services like, someone who has moved around the world would need to, like Social Security, immigration services, is very difficult at times to get through to get to where you need to, because one, my accent isn't always understood by the robot, so it doesn't interpret what I say correctly. I just go into a circle of repetition, to be honest, most of the time. The other thing is my natural first word might not be to describe my situation, might not be the same as an American-born person's. And it just simply doesn't understand what I'm asking for. And that's really a problem when you have a long menu, because I can't remember what the word they said was. I have to go through it several times to make sure I've got it right. So it's always a long experience before a long hold.
And that's actually one of the primary reasons caller needs are unmet, is that the IVR can't understand, the system cannot understand the caller for some reason. The other thing that we find is that the option that the caller wants isn't available, or they've missed it because the menu is too long. The caller picks the wrong option and now they're in an endless circle, or sometimes they time out. So unhappy callers' needs not getting met. Tom, what happens for the folks who are actually trying to help those people on the phone or who are managing the call centers?
Well, there are a couple of things that happen. First of all, and you'll hear me say this multiple times as we talk today, but it bears repeating, and that is anytime a caller disengages or opts out of the automated system, the cost to service that interaction is going to go up. If a caller opts out at this point, before they've really provided any information to the automated system, it means that it's much the same impact as if they immediately said agent or opted out at the greeting point. And even if they attempt to choose an option here, the feeling they have is going to start to negatively impact their overall satisfaction level. So we are in that same space, in the same kind of place as we were in the first step, which is we've got callers who are wanting to speak to a live agent rather than interact with the existing automated systems, which drives up costs and drives down satisfaction of your customer. So as you might have guessed, Lisa is going to talk about what an intelligent virtual agent can do here to keep the caller engaged and make them feel that their needs are going to be met.
So I thought what James said was really interesting about forgetting halfway through what had been said to him. That is a very common behavior, and that's because we've really overloaded cognitively the caller, right? There's too much there for them to choose from, for them to discern through. And so one of the most important things we can do is to lower that significantly, get rid of that long menu. And for example, say in healthcare, we know that there's kind of a constellation of things that people might ask for: doctor, billing, insurance, and instead of making them go through what could still be a long menu, it makes more sense to have the caller simply say, I want to find a doctor. The other thing that this does, when we shift into the way that this should be done, so the future as we see it with Wally and others like him, you can ask clarifying questions, right? So you keep the caller engaged, and I might say, James, it looks like you're calling today, or you said you're calling about your Social Security card. Do you currently have a card, or do you need to get a new one? You know, and it helps move through the process by asking clarifying questions. So that's really what we're trying to do, is keep that caller engaged, and we're moving them always toward their goal. Now, so it's called intent determination in the industry. We're trying to determine, the system's trying to determine what the caller needs, and the caller's trying to get what they need. So Tom, what happens when we get that intent determination right, or we get it to work more quickly and efficiently?
So first of all, the longer a caller stays engaged with a system, and in this case with an intelligent virtual agent that is having a conversation versus requiring the caller to listen, try and figure out which menu item works for them, just is going to be just generally better. So specifically though, accurately capturing and understanding the reason for the call leads to a higher probability that you're going to be able to successfully get the caller to a self-service option. And even if not, having that information is going to allow the call to be routed to the right specialist the first time, along with the information that the intelligent virtual agent, the robot, has already heard from the caller. So this accurate intelligent routing leads to a reduced number of transfers and driving down operational costs while improving the satisfaction of the customer. And we'll talk a little more about transfers in a bit. So what we're seeing is each step along the way in this journey, there's a potential for some fairly significant improvement for the caller experience and for operational efficiency. Moving forward, for the callers, that the next step in this journey is generally known as identification and authentication. And this is where, either in the case of what we're talking about, an automated system is attempting to identify who the caller is and then authenticate or confirm that the person is actually who they say they are. And obviously that sounds like something that could be easily done by a human, but oftentimes there are some challenges when an automated IVR is interacting with a caller for this. So Lisa, what do callers feel about this sort of interaction where they're trying to communicate who they are and prove who they are?
Well, I think really what it boils down to is they feel frustration and they are having to do a lot of repetition. I'm going to start with the repetition part of it, which is often people have to put in the same credentials over and over, or they will put them in and then they will have to repeat them again if they get to a live agent. So one of the things we can do is get rid of that repetition and let that information carry through with the caller so that they do it once and the system is smart enough to know. Now, the other one goes to the frustration. And Tom, you had an interesting experience recently. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about it, because it really has to do with how people can get very frustrated when they're trying to authenticate.
So Lisa, thanks. And this is a story that Lisa's heard more than once. And it was pre-COVID, and I was on vacation in San Francisco, and we were shopping at a local market that was local artists selling kind of trinkets and pieces of art, and some of them only took cash. And so I made a trip to the ATM and attempted to get some cash, and it didn't work. My card wasn't working. So I called the number on the card, and the automated system started asking me for my checking account number. Well, I did not have that handy. I was wandering around the streets of San Francisco. And so it made it very difficult for me to prove to the system who I was. And that led to a series of interactions, both with other kind of automated kind of prompts and with live agents, where I was repeatedly asked to provide my checking account number that I didn't have with me. And it was very surprising and eye-opening how difficult it was to prove to my bank that I was really their customer and I really needed their help getting my ATM card fixed. So that leads right into the impact on the contact center, which is I ended up speaking to not just one live agent, but I think 3 in that interaction. And each one of them was attempting to confirm who I was before they could do what they needed to do to help me get my card working again. So if you think about what goes on in a typical call and the time it takes, which is somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes of handle time for a live agent to confirm who's calling and that they really are that person, that just like the labor cost of that is unnecessary starts to add up in a hurry. So what can a conversational IVR intelligent virtual agent do to help avoid this situation where a caller is being transferred around and being repeatedly asked for information they don't have to try and prove that it's really them? And Lisa, you're nodding, and I know you have the answer or a set of answers.
I hope I have some answers. I think, I mentioned this before, but one, we should be able to capture the information from the caller once and have it carry through. That gets rid of the repetitious piece. Now, the frustration piece gets a little more complicated, but having different ways for users to succeed or authenticate is really important. One of the things that we can look at is biometrics. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're used to using now, I use the fingerprint on my phone all the time because honestly, I don't remember a lot of those passwords. Your voice can be used, and there are other things that can be used to authenticate you, again, helping the caller succeed quickly to get what they need. Less steps, less time, lowering that time that they spend on the phone and getting them ultimately to their goal, which is not to be on the phone with us. And I know security is very important, and that's something that's baked into this, right? That we're thinking about and working on. But if we are able to securely get people authenticated, how does that play out for the business? Like, what does that mean in terms of how the call center runs?
So, and I want to just point out, Lisa mentioned something there about biometrics and fingerprints, but the ability to capture a caller's voice and identify them positively via a voice biometric system is real, and there are organizations that can do that today. That we are and AWS, who we partner with from a technology point of view, offers that now. That's real and not some sort of futuristic. This might happen in a decade. What that turns into is just some. If you assume that, well, not assume, the normal handle time to identify and authenticate a caller by a live agent is somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. So if we assume that it normally takes 1 minute on average to do that for each call, and just off the cuff, back of the napkin kind of math, say an average handle time for a call is 10 minutes, and the number of calls that get automatically or that are automated through with the identification and authentication by an intelligent virtual agent, let's say that goes up 50%. That results directly in a 5% decrease in the overall time that live agents have to spend speaking with callers to solve their problems, which can correlate almost directly to labor cost savings of 5%. So, I mean, that may sound big, but those are real numbers, and just gives you some sense of the impact that these intelligent virtual agents can have on the business.
Hey, Tom, I have a question. So I hear that 5%, but having never managed a call center or interacted on that side of it, like, can you ballpark a number? Just like, what would that mean? Is that thousands of dollars or millions, or like, where does that fall?
Well, so if you get into large call centers that have thousands of agents, it easily gets into the millions quickly. So this is not something where if you attempt to implement this innovative kind of technology, you're going to be waiting years for your payback. The ROI is quick and big for these types of tools, and really automating more of the interaction on a voice call.
Awesome, thank you.
So moving on, we've made it through a number of steps, and I just want to point out that in some automated systems, the identification comes before intent determination, but the general task is often the same, and it's handled the same way. In a typical system today, if a caller is able to get through picking or choosing or communicating why they're calling, identifying who they are, the next step is really what we think of as routing and handling. So their call needs to go somewhere. So in the ideal case, this could be a self-service capability that I think many of you probably are familiar with, such as paying your bill with your credit card. Those often can be successful, but sometimes they are challenging. The other potential paths that can happen here are either at this point or at a prior point. A caller chooses to speak to a live agent. In most cases, that means they're going to end up in a hold queue for some amount of time, and then they end up getting transferred to a live agent. And depending on how successful they've been in the prior steps in terms of communicating who they are, what they're trying to do, the live agent may or may not have a lot of information and may have to start the whole process at that point. So as you can imagine, based on what I've just said, there might be more than just one potential areas of dissatisfaction for a caller in this step in their journey. Lisa?
I feel like I bring the cloud of doom and gloom in each time, but then also some solutions. Unhappy callers, that's really what we're talking about here. So just sort of quickly, and Tom, you touched on some of these things. If I go to self-service as a caller, I may have to put in long strings numerically that are confusing or hard to use. No natural language, we've been talking about that. I may struggle with the navigation and how the system handles errors. So if something goes wrong, will I have to start all over? Will I get lost in a circle? And then the other thing that can happen, right, if I'm on hold, and I meant to say this when I started, if you hear yourself in any of these 3 steps, if you've had an experience, I would love for you to drop it in the chat and just let us know a little bit about what happened for you. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, if we'll get to talk about them later, but I'd love to hear what's happened to you. So you go on hold. Takes too long. The music is terrible, but you have to keep listening. Or even worse, maybe there's some sort of commercial. You don't get any updates to know what's going on. So you have no confidence. The caller has no confidence that there's going to be a payoff for them waiting on the phone. And a lot of people abandon. And interestingly enough, during COVID, depending on whose numbers you look at, the abandon rate on calls to call centers overall has gone up. They think maybe because of call volume, but depending upon what numbers you look at, between 5 and 8% of callers just give up on hold. So then the other thing that can happen, okay, now I've been on the phone. Keep in mind, this caller has made it through 3 steps that may not have been optimal. The other thing that can happen is that when I get transferred to an agent, again, I'm feeling anxious if I'm the caller, because what I really need is to know, are you going to help me meet my needs? Are you going to get me what I want? I may have to repeat my information. I might get lost. I might end up with somebody who says, oh, that's not my area of expertise. Let me transfer you. So those are all the different things that can happen to a caller along the way, which basically leads to not a happy experience at all. And I think while it's very difficult for the callers, and that has some impact in what happens for the business. So Tom, on the business side of things, now as a caller, I've gotten through all this stuff and I'm not happy. How does that play out?
So the unhappiness drives it directly correlates into a measure of customer satisfaction, and the less happy you are, the less satisfaction you're going to have with this call or this interaction, which can have a compounding effect of the customer's view of your organization. And worse yet, they can if they feel really negatively, they can start passing along their negative feelings to their friends, family, and sometimes even on social media, which is can be even worse. And so the measure of that is something called Net Promoter Score NPS, and it's really whether or not you as a customer would recommend to a stranger or somebody that this company is a good one to engage with. So that's a big problem. And then as you look at as you look at the impact from operationally, all of this compounds to really drive up cost. And there's nothing more frustrating for contact center management teams than to see a large number of calls where a caller makes it through the steps to identify themselves and pass on communicate the reason for calling, and then be unable to kind of successfully complete a self-service step where it's available, because that's a missed opportunity for a call to be handled via automatically versus requiring a live agent, which means, again, it drives costs directly and is frustrating. The other piece is abandonment rates, long hold times are oftentimes potentially a regulatory measure. So that's another challenge for contact center management teams. So there are a number of different challenges. I'm going to ask Lisa to talk about some of the opportunities that exist with an intelligent virtual agent deployed to help with this step.
So I'm going to ask you all to just take a moment. You might even close your eyes and imagine this, right? So if you look, so we've been showing you kind of how it is, right? If you look down at the bottom of your screen, and then at the top, we're trying to move everybody into this better experience. So imagine you have this streamlined, direct, warm experience. What does that sound like? Well, okay, let's take Tom's example. Tom is in San Francisco. His ATM card is locked. He's been on the phone. So an ideal experience would be, hi, Tom, I see you're calling about your ATM card. I see that you've verified who you are already and that you're in San Francisco. And then the agent that launches in, right? The live agent launches in. So Tom knows we're going to meet his needs. He hasn't wasted his time. We know all the things that he's shared with us so far. That is the ideal, to streamline it and also to help that caller know not only are they in control, but they have the ability to that they're going to get their needs met. So that's the big experience. The other things, just a couple of little sidebars I want to add in here. So we put the control back in the caller's hands. The other thing we can do is we can give them the option to choose their callback time. So they don't have to sit on hold. We'll call them back on their terms at a time that works well for them. And then I think we kind of already touched on what happens with the transfer. We want it to really feel natural, but at the bottom of all of this is giving the caller the control over their experience and helping them know that their needs will be met. So Tom, what does improvement in this area though look like on the call center side of things?
So first of all, as it pertains to self-service, the greater proportion of calls that can be handled by an intelligent virtual agent because it does a better job of successfully completing a self-service interaction with the caller, or has the potential to offer self-service for interactions that really don't lend themselves to self-service via a typical IVR type automated system. So right away, there's a big potential improvement in terms of self-service rates, which drives down the number of calls that live agents have to handle. The second thing is really when you talk about that the potential for a callback when someone's waiting on hold, or to schedule a callback when someone doesn't want to wait on hold, really drives an outcome that for the contact center means that they can flatten the peaks of their call volume curves, which can correlate into a really flattening their staffing requirements. So if you can imagine during the course of a day, there are times, specifically in the morning, first thing in the morning, and oftentimes around lunchtime, but these peaks can vary, where the contact center management team has got to make sure they have agents available for a short period of time, a few hours, to handle these peak call volumes. And it makes their lives much easier if there's some way to smooth that curve in terms of the volume of calls that are coming in at any given time. And that is a one of these pie in the sky type things that perhaps folks who are managing contact centers dream of. And in the past, this really wasn't something that was feasible to offer. And now with this sort of technology, with intelligent virtual agents that can converse with a caller, it is something that's available. So really big potential improvements, both from an experience point of view and from a operational efficiency point of view at this point in the caller's journey, which leads us on to the next step in their journey, which is really the call resolution. So they've called, your customer has called, they've spent some time on the phone, and they end up completing the call. Hopefully they've succeeded at whatever they were trying to get done. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. Even when it does happen, there are some challenges that Lisa can tell us more about.
I think we've touched on a lot of those, but it's cumulative. I think that's what we really wanted to say here is that, okay, maybe the caller gets transferred more than once. If that's all, then good. But if they get transferred more than once and repeat the same information and spend more time on the phone than they wanted, or any number of different factors along these steps, it adds up, right? It adds up, and it basically takes out of your bank account of goodwill with your caller. So the more of these things stack up, the less positive their experience is. And I know, Tom, we've talked about quite a bit of this before, but when you look at the cumulative effects of a call not going the way a caller wants it to, what does that mean to the business?
So we've talked about some of these items already, which is if a caller has to speak to more than one live agent, the costs go up dramatically. So avoiding by better doing a better job of intent determination up front, you're going to be more likely to have the call end up with the right person the first time. But from a negative point of view, the other piece is a measure that's known as first call resolution. So getting the call, when you don't get the call to the right person the first time, or the caller drops, or something doesn't go right, that means that caller still had an open problem, open question, or perhaps a reason to buy more product or service, but it didn't get finished. And what that means is they're going to have to try again, which drives down customer satisfaction. And if they're calling back, it means they're going to, unless they can do it in an automated fashion, and they're going to then drive up costs because it's a call that's going to need to be handled by a live agent. So the intelligent virtual agent, it can address this overall call experience. Lisa, what does that mean to the caller?
Well, I think what it means is really a faster resolution and clear closure. What do I mean by closure? It means that when I get off the phone, either my problem is solved or I am confident that I know what the next step is going to be. You're going to call me, something's going to happen. That's really what we're looking at here. And I think I'm noticing that we're getting pretty close to time that we want to be able to answer some questions. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Tom, because I don't think we have to belabor it too much. But is there anything about business here for that fast? I think we kind of already touched on what a fast resolution and clear closure is, but is there anything else that we haven't mentioned here?
I think the overall cumulative effect and there's something more than just customer satisfaction. This really can drive net promoter score. So if a caller starts to become used to the idea that they can speak to a conversational, intelligent virtual agent and not have to wait on hold, or if potentially they need to speak to a live agent, they can choose to have a callback when it's convenient for them, as opposed to the other way around. Like that cumulative effect over time can really drive up and improve net promoter scores, which is for marketing executives and sales executives, that brand image is a big deal and important to overall business growth and profitability. Which leads us to the point where a call has ended, but there's still a potential for interaction with your customer about the call, and that is the follow-up step. And oftentimes this is known as a post-call survey. And there are different methods that organizations attempt this, and they're not all bad, but Lisa's going to talk a little more about where some of the challenges are in this step.
Sure. Well, really what happens here, and you'll notice this is in sort of a pale green, so it's not terrible, but it could be even better if we essentially give the callers their agency. What does that mean? So from a caller standpoint, that means, again, they're in charge. They can provide feedback when and how it best suits them, and they know that the feedback they provide has some impact. But the other thing that happens here is being able to get improved data on those calls. And I know that has a big impact for business, Tom, doesn't it? What happens? What is it that data allows for?
So if you're able to entice more of your customers to provide feedback after an interaction like this, by making it easier for them to do and offering more channels or doing it at a different time in a way that it's easy and on their terms, you're getting a broader swath of and a broader view of what your customers are actually experiencing and their view on their overall satisfaction, their satisfaction with this specific interaction, and capturing that information for those callers that generally wouldn't answer this question gives makes the data that does come from this step much more meaningful and impactful for management in terms of where they might need improvement or understanding where they're doing well. So really has a positive impact. There's no executive that's going to say I wouldn't like more information about what my customers think and feel about their interactions with my company. So I think we're going to move on now to just a quick summary before we get into some Q&A. And what we're showing here and what we've talked about today is improving the experience of a caller by deploying intelligent virtual agents that are conversational can lead to improved business metrics and improved financial metrics that cumulatively and collectively lead to an overall reduction in cost per call. And this is a paradigm shift just in the last few years. Previously, if you wanted to improve the experience of your customers or your callers, it required spending money. This and the technology to drive intelligent virtual agents has completely flipped that around, where by deploying this technology, you are not just driving up the experience and satisfaction of your customers, you have the potential to reduce the overall cost of your operations. And that is something that we see as really a game changer, a shift in the paradigm, as I said, and why we are continuing to invest and focus in this area. And so I just want to say thanks for everyone that's listened today, and we welcome your questions and any feedback you might have.
Yeah, we have some, quite frankly, fantastic questions already. If you have any more, please feel free to drop them in, but thank you to those who've asked so far as well. We're here through the hour, so if you have any more questions, feel free to drop them in. But first, I'm going to ask one for, honestly, I think for both of you, this is really good, from Shiva Prasad. Thank you for this session. I am working on IVR apps for more than a decade now. I get that AI can help a lot in the space, but do you really think we can just make it an open-ended menu or dialogue to the users? The IVR does many things in a flow. The AI can definitely help for the very first prompt, but can we just keep it conversational for the entire call or journey? What is your take on this?
I would love to talk about this a little bit. So I have been learning the art and the skill of conversation design. And one of the things I really like about it is that instead of it being sort of this linear process, there are all these potential conversations. So I used the example earlier of healthcare. You might be calling about billing. You might be calling about finding a doctor, any number of things. So within each of those little constellations, there are questions, right, that will help refine. And there's going to be, when we built Wally, it was a little more difficult because we really didn't have a lot of clear intents. People don't call for lots of things from us, right? So we had to sort of work on that. But in most businesses, you know exactly why people are calling, or pretty close to. So yes, I think you can do it. I think you have to watch very closely the data that you're getting and learn about who's calling, why they're calling, and you may not be able to get everything, but I think you ought to be able to get a good percentage of it. That's from my take.
And so I'm just going to follow on with what Lisa has said. And, you know, typically on a customer service contact center, you're not getting folks calling to ask philosophical questions. So as Lisa said, there's a finite set of reasons why folks generally are calling. Those are that sort of analysis is something that is not new. But the design side of it is what Lisa is talking about. From the technology side, as long as it can be designed, it can be deployed, and that is the power of this sort of technical capability. As it pertains to self-service, obviously there's got to be some integration with other systems but this is not something that is new and different. In many cases, or at least what I've seen, there is data integration available that doesn't necessarily lend itself to self-service because of the technology involved with traditional IVRs and just the interaction with a caller. So now that you can have more robust interactions and really back and forth conversations where there are clarifying questions, it opens up a realm of potential self-service that just didn't exist before. So the net of that is, from a technology point of view, the different options for self-service, there are options for self-service that are available today that are really limited and constrained by the voice technology in the typical automated system. Hopefully that addresses your question. It's a great question and one that we would love to talk about for a long time, but I think there might be some other questions. James?
Yes, I know this is one we've talked about internally as well. So Winfred asks, how are you ensuring that biases within your AI are to the best of your ability minimized, especially when the programmer is from a majority?
Well, I'm going to start and then I'll hand this off to Lisa. We have partnered exclusively from a technology perspective with Amazon and their AWS organization, and they are spending a significant amount of money to ensure that their natural language processing model and overall engine is not tied to a specific demographic or even a specific language. They are doing a fabulous job of, and we've seen this, and we've, Lisa referred to it earlier with James and Accent, but they are doing a great job just overall providing a tool set that speaks in different languages, speaks in different accents, and is really inclusive in terms of how it's able to interpret and then respond from a language perspective. We obviously are doing some conversation design, and I'll let Lisa touch on that a bit in terms of how conversation design and our methods for doing it ensure inclusivity.
Well, I think there are a couple of things, Tom. My answer is always that we need to continue to do research and pay attention, right? And so that's one of the pieces. We need to continue to research and look at what we're doing and see if there's bias in it. So we don't just say, oh, we got it. But I think the conversation design piece is critical. And I think having a diversity of designers, a diversity of voices is really, really important. Those are kind of the two. So the conversations are being created by a wide range of folks. And then we're also testing it and actually really applying some rigor to it, because that's, at the end of the day, that's how we know anything about what we do, right? Is applying some rigor to it and testing it and saying, okay, where could this be weak? Where could we maybe not be approaching this in the most broad way?
I just want to follow on to what Lisa said. And last month, our colleague Carol Rady and I spoke about the actual conversational design process, and there's a webinar recorded and available on our website that can take you through kind of the rigorous process, both from the design side and then the experience testing side. So I think there's a lot of value in that. I'm not going to pretend to be a human-centered design expert, and certainly nowhere near the level of Lisa and Carol from a conversational user experience design. I understand what they do. I don't do it, but I think that's a great source to kind of additionally, add some additional context to Lisa's answer. James, do we have any others?
So we have a couple of questions that are related. So I'm going to take Nikki's. In a world of deep fakes, how do we protect and defend against fraud?
That is a great question. So I think, companies spend a lot of time and invest a lot of money focused on really doing a great job of authenticating their interactions with their customers, regardless of the channel. And everything that companies are able to provide from a kind of an authentication perspective today via either automated voice channels or speaking with a live agent is just increased by the ability to add biometrics and that biometric voice recognition to a call coming to a contact center. So you can potentially ask the same list of questions and then ask a caller to please state your name, your date of birth, and your address. And so the system then can match the biometrics of their voice to what's been already pre-authenticated and stored. In the end, with deep fakes and enough interest and enough potential payoff, hackers and folks that might try and maybe copy somebody's voice or steal their information, the best we can do is to continue to improve the authentication steps and capabilities. We can never say that no one will ever be able to fake out the system. Lisa, I don't know if you have anything to add on to that, or?
No, I think you really covered it well.
Thanks. James, anything else?
In a related question, Tabitha asked, have there been conversations around privacy and potential fraud with applying AI models to an IVR? So I know that we talked about fraud there, but privacy as well. Thoughts around that?
We had an interesting use case actually for something that we were working on come up because of the kind of authentication that we needed to go through. I'm trying to think about, I have to talk about this a little bit carefully. But yes, one of the first conversations we had as we were designing was, okay, we need to be able to hold on to this information, but just for a limited period of time. I am not a developer, so I'm going to talk about this in the most general terms. And then that information needs to go away, right? So yes, there are lots of different ways that we can work with how we gather information, what information we gather, and do we even keep it? I think that's I hope that's getting to the question that you have, Tabitha, because there are lots of ways that we can design and work with, and other systems, that we can work with, that we validate through. It requires a lot of thought and effort, but we have a pretty strong engineering team that's been spending a lot of time learning how to do this. So Tom, I don't know if you have more that you'd like to.
I can add a little there, and I know the topic that Lisa is speaking of, and there was a very strict requirement that none of the data that a caller might have offered up to an intelligent virtual agent was stored past the end of the call. So they call, they identify themselves, they make a request, that request gets routed somewhere, but everything that they went through on essentially to identify and authenticate themselves is then immediately and irrevocably deleted. The other thing that organizations are doing that really isn't technology focused is offering, and in some states it's actually a regulatory requirement, but some organizations are offering even where it's not a requirement, and that is offering to share with a customer what information they have about that customer, and potentially allow the customer to ask that they delete it. So I think it's more than just technology from that perspective, but there's also really policies and processes and methods that go along with that. And again, much like the previous question, where about the potential for a deep fake to fool the system, this is another area where vigilance is important, and there is no kind of silver bullet like we're just going to fix everything. This is requires ongoing focus, essentially. I think, James, we may have time for one more if anyone else has a question.
Apologies as I get the unmute button. So this is a very generally speaking, where do most customers drop off throughout the user journey that we have gone through today? And I know the answer is probably going to be, it depends from my perspective. So I'm going to get that out of the way first and say that as me.
So I'll answer that first, which is it does depend. And depending on the industry, the company, the way they've implemented and deployed their automated IVR, it can vary, except for what's really common in general across all industries, companies, and technology is, in general, in that first instant where a caller hears a recording talking about, thanks for calling, please listen to our menu, it's changed. That's the most common area where people just say, hit 0 or ask for an agent and drop out. And so there are other areas along the call journey that there are higher or lower levels of really opting out of the automated system, but that is a big one. And part of that is just a trained behavior for callers. They have, all of us have been through this experience where we would prefer not to have to follow that path, where we've got to listen, we've got to try and figure out what's going on, we've got to work through all of the kind of the nuances of an automated voice system, and then oftentimes only get to the end and realize that all that time and effort that was spent was for naught, because now it was lost, or we've got to repeat it all to a live agent. I don't know, Lisa, if you have any follow-on comments before we close.
Very quickly, motivation. So what is motivating that caller, and do they have any other recourse? If they have no other recourse, or other recourse hasn't worked for them, then they are more likely to stick with it. Motivation, how important is this? I saw someone mention the Missouri Driver's License Bureau and trying to understand their COVID policies and giving up, right? What do you have to know, and how quickly do you have to know it? So it's always going to be a function, James, of how necessary the information is and what the level of urgency is. That also plays into it.
Okay, as I said at the beginning of the call, this is the second in a series. We're going to do another one next month. Before I talk any more about that, I just want to say thank you to my co-presenter, my partner in crime here, Lisa. It's always a pleasure, and I learn so much from you every time we have discussions about this topic in terms of human-centered design, customer conversational design. So thanks for doing this with me. and then move as we look forward into next month after the holidays into the new year. We're going to do our next webinar on the topic of using AI and machine learning tools and technologies to capture insights about your customers from your contact center, regardless of what channel they choose to interact with you. So voice, web, mobile, email, social. Organizations are capturing a lot of information from their customers that their customers at some level expect them to know. And we're going to talk about that in more depth, a lot more depth, with Brandon Fisher and Carol Riggy at the end of January. So thanks everyone for joining. James, I'll back to you to sign us off.
So I will be sending out the registration page to everyone who joined in case they're interested in joining next month. I know there are a couple of questions that we didn't quite get to as well. We will happily email answers to them as well. We really appreciate the questions. Thank you so much for joining us. I know this has been something we've been looking forward to presenting, so hopefully it was you all got something out of it too. We will hopefully see you next month, and happy holidays and happy new year to everyone.